this is Scott Allen Miller. Today on Sam IT, we're going to talk about how to think about IT appliances. We have a lot of appliances in IT. What is an appliance? Let's start with that. Appliances, generally accepted, are hardware devices that are pre-packaged for us with everything included, from the setup to the software to the operating system to all the hardware components. Everything's taken care of for us. There is also the concept of software appliances, which are a little bit different. Let me give you some examples of both. First, hardware appliances. We see these everywhere. NAS, SAN, hyper-converged appliances, backup devices. These are some common appliances that we see all over the place. And you can find lots of other things too. Monitoring appliances, UTMs, stuff like that. Whether it's networking or security or storage or main platforms, just about everything in IT could be purchased as an appliance. There's always someone out there willing to sell you an appliance because they tend to make good money and they're kind of nice in how they work. A lot of people like them, so someone's always willing to jump into that market. Some examples of software appliances are the same concept where we have a little bit less because there's no hardware. So it's a little bit complicated, but generally we assume that the hardware will be handled by a virtualization platform, VMware ESXi or KVM or Hyper-V. And what we get is a packaged operating system and application layer with all of the configuration done that way. Some people don't consider these to be true appliances, and that's a bit of semantics that we could argue separately, and I'm not going to try to impose an opinion here, except to note that both of them are appliances, and within the context of this video and discussion, we can treat them essentially the same as how we think about appliances. What is really important about appliances is that they are, within their context, whether it's just the software or the entire software and hardware together, they are black boxes to us. The concept of an appliance is that we are purchasing something that is completely handled on our behalf, and we are getting that because we are paying for it and dependent upon support from the vendor to make it work for us. Now, we may have a lot of things that we can do with it, such as a PBX appliance, for example. We may be the ones who put in phone numbers, set up extensions, set up the conference rooms, record the voicemail, and those kinds of things. That's fine. We're using it within a very limited application context, but everything else is handled by the vendor. If there's a problem with the backups or the system gets out of date or there's some kind of hardware failure, the vendor takes care of all those things. We don't have to know anything about it on a technical level. Essentially, with very few exceptions, an IT appliance could be purchased by a non-IT department and deployed with very little need for outside assistance and still be usable. That's roughly the idea of an appliance. Basically, you don't need an IT department to use it, or you don't need your IT department to have an expertise in that area to use it. NAS is a great example. So first of all, anything you do as an appliance, you can do without an appliance. That should be just without saying, right? A NAS is just a file server that's been appliancized. That's all NAS means. There's nothing technical about a NAS different than a file server. So if you have a, let's say, Linux file server or a Synology NAS, both of those are Linux-based file servers. One is just presented as an appliance and one is not. One is open to you to play with, the other is a black box, and you expect any support issues to go directly to the vendor. That's the only difference. Now, different people hearing this video will have very different reactions. One will say, wow, appliances are the best things ever. I don't want to have to deal with those things. I want to have someone to call. Someone else will say, I hate that idea. I can't believe I can't support it. I have to rely on a vendor. The reality is, appliances are great for some people and terrible for others. They're also great for some workloads and terrible for others. But which workloads they're good and bad for isn't dependent on the workload. It's dependent on you and your department's expertise, not on the actual workload. For example, for any given business, a NAS could be the perfect thing versus a file server. But for a different business, the file server may be the perfect thing because one has expertise in file serving and one does not. And that's all there is to it. What's very important about the way that we look at these things, and I see a lot of mistakes made around this, is that when you're going to buy an appliance, you are, one, completely dependent on that vendor. You have to accept this at the time that you buy it. There's nothing wrong with this. This is not meant to be a negative, although it does have to be noted as a caveat, but you have to be dependent on your appliance vendor. Not just that they will support you, but that they will be a viable company throughout the support length of your product. So if you're getting a NAS, for example, that is supposed to last 5 years, you need to trust that that vendor, one, will support you, and two, will be around for the next 5 years. You have to. If anything happens to that vendor, whether they stop supporting you, you stop paying, or they go out of business, your NAS is now worth nothing. Absolutely nothing, because there's no support. There's no way for you to support it because it's a black box, and there's no one else that can support it because the only people for whom it's not a black box don't exist anymore or have cut you off. That's important because there are some vendors out there who are not in that viable of a situation looking forward, and you have to consider that when you're thinking about tying yourselves to them with a purchase. Some things are much bigger deals than others. A NAS, for example, if you were to lose support, is probably trivial to move off of very quickly to another vendor. That would hurt, but it's not the end of the world. But if something like your virtualization platform, your hyperconvergence vendor, was to suddenly go out of business, you may be unable to move to another platform due to a lack of support, or it's such an expensive thing to redo your entire infrastructure that you may not be able to do that, in which case your dependency on that vendor may be very high. So you have to consider the health of your vendors in a way that you don't normally have to the effect of, if you were dealing with a build your own server, you could get generic hardware that you can pick up anywhere. All the parts are interchangeable. You could put Linux on it, for example, which may come with no support at all, and you don't care, because if any given Linux vendor went out of business, you can continue to support the system yourself. The open source community can continue to support it. You can switch to a different version of the OS. Trivially, there's no dependence on a vendor at all for your systems. So it's the polar opposite. A lot of companies go somewhere in the middle with things like Windows and other closed source software, where you still have a dependency on the vendor for certain things, but those dependencies are pretty minor. And so it's not nearly the extent of an appliance, but it is a black box within the realm of the code at least. So when you're looking at appliances, when you're dealing with appliances, it is absolutely critical to understand that at the moment you purchase it, you are making a commitment that that product is only useful to you as long as you can and will maintain full vendor support on it. If you're thinking that you're buying an appliance for 5 years, but you plan to maybe use it for 8, you have made a very miscalculated decision about how an appliance works and how you should be using it. There's really no case where you should be using an out-of-support appliance. Out-of-support non-appliances are still sometimes a problem, but not in the same way at all. If you have a commodity server that's out of support and you want to support it yourself and use third-party parts and do those kinds of things, you're pretty much free to do so with almost no ramifications, other than you don't have the vendor there to support you at the drop of a hat. But when you're dealing with an appliance, you may or may not have the legal right to change the hardware. You may not have the physical ability to change the hardware. Things may be completely locked down. Those are all decisions being made at the time of purchase. You may not be the one who made those decisions, but it's important to understand, because I see this every day, that people will come into environments and wonder how to keep using appliances that have not had support for some time, and there's no chance of getting support. They need to throw those things away. Their value is zero. They're not something that should ever be found in a production environment because they are dangerous. If anything happens to them, there's no way to deal with it. Some products, like a firewall, may be a little bit better, but if you're not getting patches, and today this is a really big deal, anything that needs vendor support for patching means that the moment you don't have support, it is unsafe, and you need to think about why you have something that has no security patching. The most critical thing you could be doing available for it in your production environment. That's something you really need to step back and rethink. How did you get into that situation? Why are you continuing in that situation? There has to be an option that involves staying reasonably secure and doing good things, right? So, nothing wrong with appliances. Appliances are wonderful things. It is simply that you're making a commitment that you need a vendor, the vendor, to be a part of your ecosystem for the length of that appliance within your organization. That's simply the commitment you're making. But in reality, for organizations, they have to make that kind of commitment to IT every day. They may not be maintaining exactly the IT staff that they have today, but they know for the life of their company, they have to maintain IT staff or they won't be able to operate their company. So to the company, maintaining a vendor in that kind of relationship and only tying to it for, say, 5 or 6 years is no big deal at all, and may be a very logical thing because a large vendor may be a lot more stable than their internal IT staff. So they don't see it as a big risk, and in reality, it's not in most cases. So it's just important to make sure that we think about appliances in the right way. They are something that is 100% dependent on their vendor for their support and their longevity and their usability, and we must maintain that for the life that we are going to use it. Of course, if you're going to move it to a lab things don't apply. That's always different. But as long as you're going to use it in production, you need to have it under support. So don't be surprised when you go out of support and you ask people, how do I make this thing work? The answer every time is going to be, you don't, you replace it. And don't try to make it work, like it just doesn't make sense. If your data's on it, you need to get your data off, okay, whatever. But don't keep trying to put it back into production, that's not where it goes. It goes in the trash because it's not worth anything. Nobody wants it because it's not supported. It's not supportable. Thank you for joining me. Remember to like and subscribe, put your comments and questions below, and if you want to sponsor us, you can do so on Patreon.